at 16 discovered astrology and started sort of calculating charts by hand. And I literally used to do it every day. I used to ask people. I was like, I don't know, like a rat up a drain pipe or something. Just off I go, up I went and was asking someone, do you know what time you're born? I'll do your chart. I'll do your chart. I was literally like that. Did hundreds of them over 6 months, I reckon. And then people would say, okay, well, tell me about it. And I'd be going, I had no idea how to interpret it at that stage. So I
Oh,
think what happened was that I learnt so much so quickly that it was like brain overload.
wow.
And doing them all by hand, I remember now, I still kept the little book when I first did my chart. It's like an exercise book, and I was calculating stuff out. It took me hours to do now what I can look at a chart and do in a couple of seconds. It was just amazing to see the difference in between how you calculate it out. And when I first did my first chart by myself, the only thing I got wrong was I didn't adjust for Greenwich Mean Time. So I didn't
Uh-oh.
adjust for my time zone.
So everything was
Yeah.
off a little. Yeah,
Everything else was fine except for the time.
yeah.
And then I realized, oh, so I had my moon sitting in Gemini, but it wasn't. It was in Taurus. So, it was a big difference when you're born in Australia, you're 10 hours ahead.
Yeah.
So it was, yeah. So I had a Taurus moon, not a Gemini moon. But I started doing that, and then probably by the time I also picked up tarot cards from a friend of mine. And the thing was, he said to me, you need to read these, because when I picked them up, I realized what a lot of the cards meant. I could nearly sort of name what they all were. And without any sort of prior, what's the word for it, or, learning of it.
Mhm.
So I sort of one day came to him and said, well, can you give me some layouts and a bit of and I sort of know what they mean, and I'll just go and practice. So I used to do astrology readings for people, and I was probably 18 at the time, and I'd charge them $30. It was, but that $30 would take me an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours. And at the end of it, I'd say, now, do you mind if I give you a tarot reading? And they go, no, unless they're in a hurry. And I say, and all I want you to do is just give me feedback and tell me if it, if it mean, if it worked, if I got it right. And I did that for a couple of years as well.
Mm.
And that's how I eventually started to learn tarot.
I
But
still
it
do.
was, what's that?
I still do.
Still
I
do
do a
tarot?
chart and tarot, both together.
You do both together. Yeah.
They
I
work
tend to do a
so
little,
well. Well, they work
yes.
well together because the tarot is very astrologically
Coffee time.
inclined.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because, you guys are having evening and I'm having first thing in the morning. So,
it's
So
okay.
Marilyn, can you tell us like your journey? Because I don't think I recorded when you shared that your first paid reading was 56 years ago for 60 cents.
Yeah, 50 cents, I think I was. I could be mistaken, but it was a fellow student. I was still in high school when I started, and I had the blessing of my teacher at that point. So I came from a different cloth. I had a teacher, and I started studying when I was a kid, 9 years old. And I think the advantage of that was I wasn't old enough to be a critical thinker. I If your teacher turned around and said, well, if you don't have enough sextiles to support that trine, it's useless. Okay, you just believe it because that's what your teacher tells you. And you know that now she was a modern astrologer
yeah.
at the time, and she also read the tarot. And so, and she was also a medium. So I do all three. And
Can, can you tell us?
so well, I can't remember who, because as soon as you do one chart, you've got a whole bunch of other fellow students who want their chart done too.
Yes.
So it's a question of who was first. I just remember I started and I was really, really busy with fellow students, but then started going to teachers. Now I'm $2. Like within months, I went from 50 cents to $2. And then within a year, I was $15. And why? Well, I thought by raising my price, people would stop coming because I couldn't keep up with things, right? And I have homework to do and that kind of thing. And there was expectations for me to do other things in life. And You know, I have a Taurus moon in the 8th house. I'm a 12th house sun with the stellium, with Neptune right on my ascendant. So yeah, it was interesting because with my secondary progress sun, as soon as it hit my ascendant, that's when I went out to the public. And
And was that still in high school when you
or
went out to the, is that what you mean by the public?
yeah, when I first started started doing this, and back then it was as Luke suggested, there was, you know, I have my teacher and she knew quite a few people, but there was no schools back then. There were no, you relied on books, you relied on little newspapers or little publications, because back then I got about maybe 3 newsletters, and back then the newsletters were snail mail. Like and you pay for a subscription, and can't remember, I think it was $2 a year you would pay for a subscription, and all these, it would be maybe 2 sheets of, maybe 4 sheets, and it was always folded this way, and 4 sheets of print, and there would be maybe 3-4 different articles of astrologers that I didn't know, and that's how things manifested. And I remember getting my first ephemeris, and back then it was a Swiss ephemeris. It wasn't, Michelin didn't exist back then.
Yeah,
It
that's
was
right.
the
Yeah.
and then I had the Raphael
Mhm.
Aspitarian. My teacher would get me that as a Christmas gift every year, and I'd have the Raphael for the next year. And I love Raphael. I to this day I still get Raphael, and it's just more for me than anything else. And it's not even that. I think it's just a tradition. You know, it's one of those things that
Yeah.
you just
Your
always
annual
do.
thing for yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's one of my annual things.
Yep.
And so, you know, I think one of the beautiful things learning how to do a chart by hand is you learn the motion of the planets so much better. You get a respect of, you know, when you did charts by hand, once you did everybody your own age, you know that Pluto's not going to move at all. It's just going to be within a less than a degree, maybe 2 degrees, you know, so you can ballpark it a little easier. Or it was the easiest one. Once we got to Pluto, it was easy peasy because it was pretty much the same for everybody. Now, that's the way I look at astrology. Now, I can't, I think a complete reading is astrology with the tarot, because both of these tools present different qualities within them, and they blend so well together. For me
So,
anyway.
Marilyn, how do you see what do you see as the main difference between? I've got my own theories about the difference between astrology and tarot, because I personally believe that tarot was born out of astrology, and
So do I.
primarily as a time when people just didn't learn to read and write, so they
Correct.
did it in picture form, and they used the cycles. Yeah.
that that's a good theory, and it's certainly something I wouldn't oppose, because the tarot is one of those great mysteries. We know it suddenly popped up, and you know, we can say it's suddenly shown. But I'm years ago, there was a Dr. Prendergast who worked at the Royal Ontario Museum, and he was an archaeologist. And just how I ended up in certain circles of people, he turned around knowing I knew tarot and asked if I'd be interested in looking at some tablets that he brought back from South America. And these tablets resembled, and they were Mayan tablets or Mayan work. And it was fascinating because I could see the tarot and astrology in it, you know,
Yes,
so
I would
of
be
major
totally in
arcana.
agreement. Yeah.
So, you know, it was just fascinating. But this is a fascinating field. And I certainly say that you got to have a lot of passion. You have to have a lot of wit about you. You have to know how to put yourself out there. And I think those are qualities. But the difference between astrology and the tarot, I think astrology, of course, can give us the weather report of what the weather you're going to walk into.
Yep.
But the tarot is going to show you what street you're on and what the house looks like.
It's
Okay.
really fascinating because I met you, Marilyn, at a conference in Chicago in 2009. And at
Okay.
that time, you were the only one that I knew who combined those two tools. And and even I think attending SOTA, there weren't many talks that combined the two tools. And I feel like only in the past maybe 5 years, 5 to 10 years, there's a lot more people in who are blending the cards with the chart,
Or
as
there is
well as lectures. Yeah.
or it could be something slightly different. You'll find that the majority of the people that do blend it are, no offense, Luke, older people, more mature
Mm-hmm.
people.
Are
And
you
that,
you telling me that I'm old and mature?
no,
No.
I'm
But
not. No, absolutely
Maybe
not.
getting old. I don't know
But
about
you're
mature.
40 through. You're just 40 through. Remember that. You're 40 through. You're through your 40s.
Yeah.
That's it. And if people think you said
Right.
42, say thank you. I think
I
you
think
like
I'd have
that
to
one,
thank
huh?
them.
That's a
I'll have
good
to
one.
thank
Yeah.
them for that.
Yeah,
Yes.
just say
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
63. Nobody says nothing. But one of the things is that I think you'll notice that a lot of people, a lot of astrologers, when they go to conferences, don't necessarily. I know a lot of astrologers who blend tarot.
mhm.
I know a lot of them. However, they don't broadcast it at an astrology conference.
Yeah.
No, you don't. I'm one of those. I mean, I have talked with
Other than
tarot, but
me,
a lot of the time when I've done astrology conference, especially lectures, they've been a little bit more scientific based, if anything,
right?
and the correlation between the science side as well as the astrology. The tarot, a little bit like yourself, Marilyn, my Neptune sits just above my horizon. So it's not that far. So, we've got that same sort of thing in
Yeah,
common.
yeah, yeah.
And it opposes my moon in Taurus, similar to yourself. So, it's there's definitely that intuitive side. But I think, I think back to astrologers in general, and I think about the famous astrologers. I refer to one specifically, like that, like Nostradamus. And you go, he wasn't just an astrologer.
No, he was
He
he
was
was a
a
scribe.
psychic. Yeah, he
Yeah,
was a psychic.
he would do scrying constantly.
Yeah,
All his
yes,
contraries were written through scrying,
yes.
you
So
know?
yet at the same time, he did astrology as his basis. And I like your analogy when you said that astrology shows you what weather's coming or what where you're at or what the town you're in, but the
Yeah,
tarot will give you a clearer picture of what streets you're walking on.
yeah,
And that's probably a pretty good. See, sometimes I look at the astrology and you get overwhelmed because there's a lot of things, and this is for everyone out there. There's a lot of things in the chart all happening at once. And sometimes looking at the timing or what is, I'll give you an example. We've just had a solar eclipse. And I'm looking at it going, well, that's going to affect me in some way because that's happening exactly on my Mars, like right on the degree. So what happens on that day? I blow up the engine in my car.
how
Now, my
joyful.
point is, and it wasn't my fault. It was one of those things where, in short, I've got to deal with it today, actually, because it's after a long weekend for us. But we got into a car 30 kilometers away at another town, and it was fine. And I drove along. And then what the mechanic has said is that it appears that my good old Ford Ranger has a little radiator that's at the back of the engine. And sometimes they develop a little crack and the water leaks out. And when the water leaks out, what happens is it drops in the engine, but the sensor for the heat in the engine is at the top of the engine, near the radiator at the top, at the front. So because there's no water going past, it doesn't tell you it's getting hot.
Oh my.
So guess what? I got to the next town and the whole car was seized. And we didn't know. So, and I thought, oh, great, wonderful. But to predict that astrologically, and you know that that's going to be the motor vehicle. Yes, Mars is associated to your movement, it's associated to mechanical things, but to know that specifically, wasn't too sure as an astrologer. But if you were a psychic, or if you were using the tarot, it might show up to me, it might be, the chariot comes up with something going on with it. And
Yeah, it would be
okay,
the
well,
chariot and maybe the Knight of Swords or
yes, exactly. That's right.
or or the Death card or the Tower, if it's a total
Something's
write-off,
going to
it
kill
will
it.
be
Yes.
sure
Yeah.
something's going to kill it. Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that's exactly what will happen. I mean, when I
Yeah.
do combinations, which is something that you can do in the Romany spread really quite well, but the astrology spread is a very informative spread as well. I just tend to, I think you tend to resonate to what you originally learned. And I learned the Romany spread was one of the very first spreads I learned, which is a very complicated spread. But I always do astrology first because the astrology, well, it depends if I see them the first time, second time, third time. Nowadays, because I use solar fire, I can write the date the last time I've read them. So,
Yeah.
and I do this thing called lunar transits, and but that's with a regular client because there's no software that does that. That's all I have to manually do it. So clients that have been with me 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, providing they don't die on me, and then they're with me in a different way, and I don't have to do their charts. I'm trying to be funny, you're not getting it. Okay.
I'm getting it.
Because you're already tuned into it. You know what's coming up for them. Yeah.
Well,
So yeah, so with one of the things with astrology is that it's a great tool. It's a very accurate tool, but we're nowadays I'm saddened to see so many people learn such bad astrology.
Yes.
And I'm seeing, people don't read books anymore. They're watching the video on YouTube and thinking that is going to be all they need to learn.
Mm.
And
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
beginning
That's
to
good.
see more and more of that. And maybe I grew up so structured with my astrology and tarot, like everything was very, very structured. And I used to think that sometimes my teacher was just a little too OCD about things. And now I realize actually she was probably the best and most influential woman I ever met because she was so ahead of her time. And she knew great astrologers like Isabel Hickey and Sybil Leek and Paula Palmer and Joan Negus and no, I don't know, but quite a few.
Yes.
And
They're all
um,
names that people don't remember anymore. That's the issue. I
names,
do.
yeah,
Yeah.
names. But I remember meeting Isabel Hickey and Linda Goodman shared an afternoon at her house in the Appalachians. And she was she was the one who brought astrology to the dinner table. That's what I
Yes.
always said to her. I said, Lynn,
Mhm.
you brought astrology to the dinner table because she wrote these books, astrology for lovers, astrology, sun
Love signs.
signs.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Hold
those,
that thought. Watch this.
oh, he has them. There we go. Love signs, right. And and yeah,
Thought you'd
and
have a chuckle.
and everyone would buy that and you didn't need to know astrology. And it was meats and potatoes, very simple.
Check out the thickness of the book
I know, I know.
and the size of the print.
She is extremely eccentric. Her
Yeah,
dogs
I
were
could imagine.
vegetarian, and I'd
Oh,
never seen a
okay.
vegetarian dog. We're talking the early 70s, and I never knew a dog could be a vegetarian.
Well, I knew somebody who had vegetarian dog because they were right into humanitarian. They're actually quite well known in Australia, so I'm not going to mention names. But
Oh,
I did a reading for them at one particular time at their house. This is somebody who was on TV many years ago in Australia. But the most horrible thing was that one day the canary she had got out of the cage, and guess what? The dog ate it. Well, you might want to make it a vegetarian, but it's still got incisor teeth,
yeah, yeah.
unfortunately. So not a very
And
pleasant
that's
story, but anyway,
the
that was
other, and that's the other thing. I mean, over the years, my teacher always taught me, she said, look, now my teacher was very well known in certain very elite circles. And that was maybe the biggest blessing because she did pull me into her realm. She knew she was dying. I was the last apprentice, for the lack of a better way of putting it. And she died when I was 17, almost 18. So she
yeah. So
died,
young. Yeah.
not that many years afterwards. And at the beginning, many of her clients, I mean, I received many of her clients, not all of them, but many of her clients, but I think they were apprehensive because I was a kid to them.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
like, what does this kid know? You know, and there was some truth in it because you need to have a little bit of life experience, I think, to sort of rationale some things out. I think, you know, do I think I'm a better reader now than I was back then? Yes, I do. And I think I'm better only because after reading, I have no idea how many people I've read in my lifetime. No idea. My database has over 10,000 clients, and I can't. I mean, I'm blessed. I've never had to look for work. It's always been there for me. So, you know, there was the concept of when were you going to be an astrologer? I don't think I ever gave thought to it. I just did. And
You just were. Yeah.
and it just took over my life, you know, like, yeah, I had some other jobs temporarily, briefly, a month here, 2 months there, but then I got too busy with doing astrology and being a reader. And I preferred that. I have more fun doing that. You know, I'm nosy and I want to see what people's lives are all about, you know? And then when I started doing my I have my very first politician. That was pretty scary, but it pulled me into a different world again. And now in election time, especially in the United States and Canada, England, only once in Australia, once did I do a campaign in this for an Australian candidate. But for me, you know, to do politics means that you have to be very, very guarded with how
Yes.
you say things, where you say them. I would never reveal who my clientele are, even if they're nobody. And there is
Yeah.
a reason for that, because I think everyone has a deserving factor of privacy. But the other part is that this work, once upon a time, could really jeopardize if they were a leader of a country or, you know, going to be a federal politician or a state or provincial politician, and it got to the media, they'd have a field day for it.
Yeah.
You
Well, look
know,
at what happened with Ronald Reagan and Joan Quigley.
well,
You know?
you know, that one I've asked Joan, why did she do that? Like, why would you write? And she just said Nancy told her she could. And I think it was, she just wanted to broadcast to the world, I'm the White House astrologer. And
Mm.
she did get a lot of clout for that.
Yeah.
And she was good.
Yeah.
She was really, really good. I mean, I learned some of her techniques and she's good, you know? So that part you can't take her away from her.
No, you
But
can't. And I don't.
but
Yeah.
I struggled with her riding on the tailgates of a famous person, you know?
Mm.
Like, I have a lot of celebrities, and my kids grew up watching celebrities coming in and out of the house. And I guess it became white noise to them, all but with my
Yeah.
son. And he
Understand.
was maybe 8 years old at the time. And I was just saying goodbye to a client. And this client
Just.
was on a movie shoot and had a red Ferrari sitting in my driveway. And my son's walking up the driveway, and she's a very, very good looking movie star. And my son looking at me, where the movie star is also standing, saying, wow, what a hot looking babe. And I screamed out his name because how dare you be so rude? And he says, oh, I didn't mean her, Mom. I meant the car.
Yeah. Oh well.
So
You
what do
always
you
get the
do
truth
with
from
stuff
babes,
like
don't you?
that? You know, like
Yeah.
your face goes red and you're apologizing and
You just sort
she's,
of say sorry. You probably meant both.
oh, no, he really just meant the car.
The car. Yeah, I know. I get it. Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah.
There's two things that I wanted to touch on. One, the techniques that you mentioned that you found helpful, but more going back to earlier when you were talking about at that time there weren't any schools and you had a teacher, and that goes to like the lineage model versus the model with schools. And I was just wondering how did your teacher structure the lessons? Like, was it just one technique for like a few months? And then when you mastered that, she layered on the next technique? Or
Yep.
was it kind of like one first, like half an hour this part, and then the half an hour the next technique?
No, we started very simple. Understand, I was 9 years old, or just turned 9, so I was still very, very young, very immature. I was still a really, really very much a kid. So we started
Yeah,
with just
would be. Yep.
basic signs, what the signs meant, then what the planets meant. And back then, Pluto got high standings, got very high standings. You know, you didn't dare. Nobody's going to tell. I don't still haven't heard any astrologer talking about Pluto being demoted.
No,
Nobody
definitely
has
not.
the no,
I've been
nobody
enough
has
through.
the balls to
I've been
say that.
enough. I've been through enough Pluto transits to know that it actually does
Pluto
what it does.
can be quite an energy to reckon with. You know, I
Yeah.
don't dismiss that energy at all. I was fascinated when Chiron got such a stand, and I say that because, look, we've had Sedna, Planet X, a whole
Haumea,
lot, like
Yeah.
all these
Eris.
other Eris, all these other planets, and they still didn't get the kind of input that Chiron
Recognition.
got discovered. And it was almost immediately I started seeing Chiron being used in charts. And, you know, you go to, well, Chiron was discovered in 77,
That's
Mhm.
right. Yep.
right? 77.
Yeah.
Yep.
77. Yeah.
So I was at the Renaissance Fair in California in 81, and this fair is huge. It's very huge. And they had a bunch of astrologers there, and they were all gathering together and talking about Chiron. And every one of them had Chiron in their chart. Every one of them had already plotted Chiron and was utilizing Chiron. And it was like fascinating to me. And I do think that planet came in a very auspicious time period, because it was the height of HIV being discovered, and nobody knew the causation of HIV at the time. They thought it was like leprosy or something. It was pretty, and it was deadly, and it was very, very deadly. And the other thing, within less than 10 years, all these other diseases were now being recognized, like fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue. These are diseases, or irritable bowel. None of those were really recognized as chronic long-term diseases, where now they are. Like, so, and I just think Chiron came in at a very auspicious time, because that's when I know when the Canadian government, pretty much all throughout the Commonwealth, started recognizing those in as much for the word disability. And that was in the mid 80s, I would imagine, in around then. And that was Chiron's doing, I think. So it's just interesting. I just find that particular asteroid, and it is an asteroid, and it's, yes, I'm talking about the asteroid Chiron, not Chiron, Pluto's moon, or
No, exactly. That's right. The asteroid.
there's 2 asteroids named Chiron, no. Anyway, but I'm talking about the one that is out with our moon, out in that area. So
Out beyond Saturn.
yeah. So anyway, it's just interesting. I think a lot of astrologers nowadays have forgotten, or I don't know. I hear a lot of astrologers struggling, and I usually ask them, what do your clientele want? What kind of readings do they want? And I have a lot of clients at the get-go did not want astrology. And I said, sorry, this is the way it works. I do astrology, your natal chart the first time. I only do the natal chart once, never do it again. And then from that point on, it's always forecasting, because all forecasting will constantly change. And depending on what time, like
Yep.
second time, I might squeeze in the Sabanian degrees, just simply because it's a wonderful esoteric thing to throw in. But the third time is, now we're really going to get into astrology. By the fourth time, they're asking me, oh, I can't wait to hear the astrology.
That's
So
right.
they're now drawn into it, and they now understand the value of it. But I find that astrology, many astrologers who want to make a living at just doing astrology, That's wonderful because you're not, people would rather get their cards read than a chart, believe it or not, because they don't understand the chart, or the astrologer is not presenting it in a way that they can relate it to their life. You know,
I
like,
find, Marilyn, I'm just jumping in for a second because because I do, like you both, there is a definite desire for people, say, for example, there is how would I put it? There is a definite misunderstanding until somebody experiences something that's event-based that you predicted. And then they go, oh, right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it changes. So what I mean by that, and this is probably a little bit of it, and correct me if you agree or disagree. The other thing when you were talking about astrology shows you the town you're in and the tarot shows you the streets you're walking on. What I've also, my experience with tarot is that, especially psychic abilities and tarot, doesn't give you accurate timing, but astrology does.
so
And
you
that's
know
the
how to put them
difference.
together. And
Yes.
that's the beauty of it, because then when you see, oh, you know, in May, things are going to be really crappy because Mars is squaring their Saturn, and it's all in the second house or something of that nature, and they're going to lose money or something. And then the tarot is showing, aha, job loss in
Yes.
around that same time period.
Yeah.
Okay, now we got something. And
That's
all
right.
it does is it reinforces one to the other. Now I know what this nastiness is. You're going to lose your job. You better look for a new job. That company's going to close down. They're going to go belly up. And sure enough, they're out getting a new job. And as they
Yeah.
finally get that new job, they just find out their company is about to close down.
Do you ever find that your clients don't really tell you the full picture, and then
Oh, I
later they
don't
went,
ask.
"Oh, I
Interesting
forgot
enough,
to
I
tell you
never
that."
ask any questions. I say, make a list of questions before we get together. And I record everything I do. In fact, I
Yeah.
was the first person in Toronto to ever start recording. And I did that more because at the time there was this wave of gypsies going through Toronto, and I didn't want to be charged for scamming people.
Yeah. Fair
So
enough.
I decided to record everything, and I would give them the tape. But if they had a claim about me, where's your recording? And I had that only happen once in my whole career. And once we listened to the recording, I didn't even say anything they said. None of the things that they claim I said was not even on the recording.
And that's the
So,
sort of thing that does happen. It's like anything. I tend to agree with you. You know, you've got this, what is it, society of sort of comes after you if you say, "Oh, you said that," and I'm going to hold you to it. That's not.
especially if you
I've
know
never.
it's not your style to say something like that.
Yes. And I
You know,
generally would say that I don't think I've ever had anyone come after me as such to say, "Hey, look, blah blah, you told me this and this didn't happen." I do
oh, I
have
have,
I do have one client that I remember. It was a couple that used to come to me all the time. And there are situations when I've said, I've seen transits coming through and they've asked me, should I buy this particular business? And I said, no, you probably shouldn't. You should
yeah,
wait because this is not necessarily going to work out. And then they come
yeah.
back next time and they say, oh, so how, they said, oh yeah, we bought the business. And I'm like, okay, all right, great. And then you wonder in 2 years' time, what they're coming back saying, well, how am I going to get out of this problem I'm in financially? And I went, well, you didn't listen to me the first time, right? So, and sometimes I find that's easier to see in hindsight, especially when you're doing other people's charts. It's harder when you're doing your own, I
Well,
find.
I think sometimes it's like the doctor is the worst patient, you know. I think
Exactly.
astrologers are the worst. I don't read for myself very, very seldom. I might
Yes,
do,
I'm the
I
same.
look at my solar
How about you, Jen?
return, I look at my ingresses, I look at my secondary progress once a year at the end.
Yeah,
Yeah. Unless I'm going through something, then I might. But unless I'm going through something, I don't, I'm too busy. I'm just really
yeah.
too busy. And so,
Do you
and
find it also from your side that you have a fairly, like like you said, you've had a look at your solar return, you've had a look at this, you've got an indication of what's going on. So you're living through that expectation anyway, sort of in the back of
yeah,
your mind. It's like, oh
yeah,
well, that's just part of that. Is that
yeah.
how you sort of approach it?
Sort of, yeah. And I also, I mean, my day timer I make my own day timer because I have software that I can have my chart inserted so I know all of the transits, and it's actually by day watch. I don't know if you've ever heard of that software, Matrix.
I have heard of it. Heard of
Okay.
Matrix software, yeah.
Well, that used to be Michael Irwin's baby, and then he sold it to David Cochran. Anyway, yeah, what this is, so it's just a calendar, but on the side here are all the transits that hit me and in the sky. Oh, you can't see
No,
it
it's a little
very
bit.
well. There it is. So
Okay.
and that's all it is, but that I use this as my day timer. So when I'm booking public events, that kind of thing, or something really, really significant, I don't want to do it in a void of course.
No.
Okay,
So
so
that's
this tells
basically
me my
just moon,
void of
they're
course.
moon positions, are they?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
which is great.
it's great, and it just keeps my world simple. I always look at my Raphael just because I need to. That's a once a year kind of thing. I go through it and I mark it off with highlighters, and I really mess the books up, but that's okay because it's the only book I allow myself to write inside.
So just a quick one about your little book, your moon book. Is that something you print yourself?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you pull that out, and primarily it's just the the lunar aspects, and then
No,
you put them into a calendar.
all aspects,
All aspects.
all
Okay.
aspects. And I could set it up pretty much the way I want to. I got natal to natal. I print off my stationaries at the beginning. So I know my stationaries are at the beginning of the book. Then I
Mm-hmm.
print off my birthday. I print off all my secondary progress, my tertiary, my minors, my solar return. And I also look at my lunar transits.
Okay.
And then, so it's transit to transits, transit to natal, progress to natal, and natal to the solar arc. So all of
Okay.
those are in there. So I get a nice, concept. And then this breaks it right down to the minute for this breaks it right down for my moon of void, of course. And on the other side, it has the ephemeris right in it for the month. Not that, I have an ephemeris everywhere. Like I'm an ephemeris alcoholic,
Yeah,
if
okay.
there is such a thing. I have no idea how many ephemeris
Is
I
that
own.
something you just buy once?
An ephemeris?
No,
No, the
sorry.
software
The
program.
software is Day Watch
Okay, so it's by
and
Cosmic Patterns?
cosmic
Okay.
pattern. Yeah.
So
And
you
I
just
don't,
buy it once and you
yeah,
install it and then you've
yeah,
got it.
yeah. It's a great little software.
Okay.
That I use it
By,
for
who's it by again? Sorry?
It's a
Matrix or no,
Cosmic Patterns.
cosmic
Cosmic
patterns.
Patterns.
It's
And I mean,
Did that
you
take much
can
setting
get
up once you did it?
pre-printed astrology stuff, but it's not going to have your chart in there. You can
No,
put
that's right.
your chart in it, right? So that's why I want that.
Yeah.
And then I also use it for Christmas gifts because I do everyone's transits for the year.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes out of Day Watch as well. And those are the two things. And that is it's a good seller. It sells it, like I sell at least 50 to 100 of those booklets at Christmas time. These
Yeah.
I don't advertise. You see, I don't advertise. I don't because it's just more work. Like it's
Yes.
just a
I
lot of
totally
work.
understand. Yeah. It's not something you can automate, printing out a book and setting it all up.
Right. And people don't realize that all costs time. It takes time to do all of that. But I do this thing that's in high demand with I'm a minister with the Reverend with the Spiritual Church of Canada. And one of the workshops for fundraising that is always in big demand is my astrology one, because it's real basic astrology. And I give at the beginning some basic weird astronomical things as well as astrology things. And why? Because I think it's important for astrologers to know a little bit about astronomy.
They need to know a lot.
I think it's helpful. I mean,
Yeah,
I've only
yeah.
taken 1 year of study as in astronomy. And again, it's a time thing. It's just I'm always busy and trying to find
Totally
time out
understand.
for that,
Yeah.
So,
to take
It's
time out for that kind of study.
so this is one nagging question is in the field of divination, where if you're, casting I Ching coins or rods or scrying, do you see astrology as divination?
I think it depends on what you're doing with it. Okay. When it comes to looking at a natal chart, I don't think that's divination. I
no,
think
neither do
that's
I. Maybe
chart
horary astrology
interpretation.
might
Yeah.
come into that.
Horary,
Mm,
yeah, horary is divination, absolutely.
Mm,
I think
yeah,
electional can sometimes be divination too, because you
mm.
can get same aspect, same weight, yet you're resonating to one more than the other. And so that sometimes can be. I also think sometimes forecasting can be more divination. Some, but not all.
yeah.
And
So
I tend to
I
agree with you, Marilyn. Yeah,
do you think it's a science?
in some ways it is a science because there is a pattern of continuity in it, and science expects a continuity pattern, meaning that we know we're working with geometry. Predominantly it's geometry that we're working with angles, and we know out of experience that when an angle is activated, the outcome is predominantly the same every time. The situation could be different. That's finding the street in that town. But we know, like your example of the eclipse on your Mars, you knew something was going to go, uh-oh.
occur. Yeah,
Yeah, you knew it's an uh-oh.
yeah,
So that in some ways is a form of divination when we know it's an uh-oh. But it's also a form of science because we have seen that pattern perform the same way over and
and
over
over
again.
again.
There
Yeah, that's
is an
part of the cycles. Yeah,
expectation of that. So that's what I think is the science part of astrology, where tarot doesn't have that kind of foundation. Astrology really has a mathematical foundation. We as astrologers need to understand. I work with tropical, and even if you didn't work, even if you just work strictly with sidereal, it doesn't really matter at this state of the game, because where the planets really are and what numbers we're working with are not necessarily 100% correlating, but does the system work? Yes, it does work. And that's what,
yeah,
see, it's always been tropical astrology. Vedic astrology didn't happen. Western astrology came, Tim Tester, or is it Jim? Jim Tester. I don't know
yep.
if you have
Jim Tester.
history of
Yeah.
Western astrology. That was a very, very good book, a very, very good book. My favorite book, though, is Lee Lehman's Astrology and Sustainability. Blew me away, that book. I would have to say, of all the books I've ever read in my life, I couldn't put the book down
And why is that, Marilyn?
because every page was a page turner about Pluto. And
Yeah,
she at the time was comparing, the book was written in maybe 2018, 2017, around there.
yeah.
Maybe a little bit earlier. Maybe it was a little bit earlier, but I'm not that sure. But knowing, even 10 years ahead, Pluto's having a return in the USA chart.
It's Pluto. Like government is Pluto. It's all about the power and control over the people,
Yeah.
and usually done in a very underhanded manner for many years. When you think about the US, I laugh and I go, out of the US as being since it was constitutionalized, I think America has been at war with some country in the world 228 years out of the whole time it's been in that period. So it's always been at war with
Wow.
somebody.
Yeah.
So, and when you
So
think about it
what's
like that, you go,
America's?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty
But
full on.
America's got Aries where?
Where's Aries
Yeah.
In the
In
West.
the
in the
American
chart?
chart.
Off the top of my head, I can't remember.
I think it's,
Just be,
I think, I think,
I can have a look.
if I'm not mistaken, I
Hang on a
think,
second.
oh, see,
I've just
this
had a
is a
mental
problem when
blank.
you're talking
I
to
should
people
know
who
that,
don't,
but I don't really look at it too often.
well,
So
I don't think
that's
any of us look at things too often.
it's very interesting, isn't it?
It is,
I'm looking it up too, but there's different
yeah,
versions. Sibley.
US independence chart. Aries is on the 4th house and on the 5th house. It's an intercepted house, so it's the 4th and 5th.
okay, what's a Sibley chart? That seems to be the one most astrologers like.
Because that one gives Sagittarius rising.
I'm pulling up the Declaration of Independence,
Well, that's the one I just looked at. The
but
independence chart.
I have
It
I
says
have that on
5:10
the
p.m. in
6th.
Philadelphia.
I have two
See what I
choices.
mean? Even astrologers cannot
That's
agree.
true.
Right.
So-
Well, even with
could be-
Canada's chart, I mean, I sit in perplexity and with the Canadian chart. And I mean, I worked on the Canadian chart for a long, long time before I came to the conclusion of what it was. And it's interesting. So the United States is Cancer. And my big thing was there was no way that Canada could be a Cancer. There's just no way. And I say this because we, as a country, we live in a big country, small population, and if you ask any Canadian, you're like Americans? We're not. We're a mosaic
No.
up here. We're not a
No, you're very
melting
different.
pot. We're very,
No.
very different. So, July 1st versus July 4th, that's only 3 days difference. So you're going to have similar strongholds. So after doing a lot of research and working on 2 campaigns and realizing this is not the right chart. This is not, it can't work. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So off into the deep end, I went and did my homework and realized the Canadian chart was March 29th, 1867. Huge difference, and gave us Cancer rising with an Aries.
Aries sun.
And
So what made the difference? How did you manage to discover that was the
do a
chart?
lot of digging in history to begin with to find out when the papers were signed for the Dominion of Canada. The father of Confederation signed the chart, not in Ottawa, Canada, because then at the time in 1867, Ottawa Parliament buildings were just being built. So nobody was there yet. They just had construction there and mud, lots of mud. And so it was actually held because prior to that, the British government had their first government buildings built in PEI, which was maybe the first island they came to, I guess. And so it was in Charlottetown, PEI. And according to one snippet of books and just one of the senators was my great grand uncle. So there is news in our family that the paperwork was signed, then they went for dinner. And dinner, where the dinner was to where the paperwork was a 20-minute walk. And dinner was at noon hour because the East Coast, and you have to understand that culture, dinner was done at noon hour because it was a farming community. That's when they had their big meal, was at noon hour. And then at the end of the day, it was light meals because usually after dinner, it was cleaning all this stuff up because they're up at sunrise or before to do all the manual labor before the heat gets too hot, all of that. So anyway, and that chart works really, really quite well.
Interesting.
I have more questions, and I'm hoping that maybe we can do a follow-up to this one, because I know Luke.
Been very interesting so far. Yeah.
And there's more, because I know you wanted to talk about the minor aspects.
Minor aspects.
And also
I'd love to hear what you think about those.
Oh, I specialize in them.
Okay, beautiful.
I don't say I specialize in them. I think minor aspects can give us these nuances that you're not going to find in the big aspects.
So,
things
couple of quick questions. What do you consider the minor aspects? And my next question is, when you find them being activated strongly, are they by declination close together? or like, are they parallel or contra-parallel, that type of thing at the time? Have you ever checked to see? So, for
I've
example,
never,
you might have a minor aspect of Venus and the Sun with a semi-sextile, but at the time they're actually parallel with each other by declination, very close. Do you find that, I'm just curious as to see if there's any other correlations.
I don't pay a lot of attention to the parallel and contra-parallel. I just
Okay,
don't.
that's fine.
I just don't
Yep.
pay too much attention to that. And just depending on, when I deal with university students or young people where they're deciding where their path is for school, that kind of thing, like they have a general idea, but they're really not quite sure. That's when minor aspects can really come in and be handy dandy,
Okay.
show the
Beautiful.
strengths or shows their weaknesses. And I've done a few lectures with a couple of astrological communities in that regard. And it's one of these things that minor aspects, people overlook them. They don't know how to utilize them. They don't know what to do. One of the things is minor aspects. There is one, the sesquiquadrant square, that I don't think is minor at all. I think that
Yes.
one, man, oh man, it's like pulling the rug right under your feet and you don't even know what hit you, but it hurts.
So when
And I
somebody
don't
has
find
that,
that minor.
so when
Are you
somebody
talking
has
about
that,
45 degrees or the 135 or both?
Oh, I keep minor aspects pretty tight. Usually 1, 2 degrees, 3 degrees max.
Yeah.
Pretty
I think
tight.
she's talking about the 135.
But the actual aspect, the 135 degree aspect or the 45 degree aspect? The
Oh, the
semi-square or the
sesquiquadrants or the 135?
135, yes.
Right.
I was
right.
gonna make a statement about that because I've got an aspect in my chart that is exact on that within about a minute or two, and that's Moon to Mars. And that has given me grief all my life.
What one? The one,
Moon
one
to
before.
Mars.
135,
Yeah,
yeah.
that one's the nastiest one.
Do you feel like
the 45 is a semi-octal, so or a semi-square. So I don't worry about that one nearly as much as the sesquiquadrant square. That one to me is that one can be, if you have it natally in their chart, this is the one that with Mars to your moon, it will always give you emotional frustration.
Yeah.
do you have the
or a lot
45?
of emotional disappointments.
But Luke, do you have the 45 or the 135?
135.
135,
Yeah.
yeah.
The
So, for
135.
example, my moon is at 25 of Taurus and my Mars is at 10 of Libra. It's right on. And we're talking
Yeah.
25:36 and 10:38. So we're talking within two minutes.
See, my moon's
be
at
correct.
20 degrees Taurus. Isn't that interesting?
So it's like that Moon Mars.
That's
I
tough.
totally get it. I find that how it manifests with me is, even as I've got older, I constantly have to keep myself in check about being frustrated about things.
Yeah.
Constantly emotional
It's
reactions.
emotionally frustrating. Yeah.
I call it one of those. I'll give an example, silly little example, but I can handle big pressures reasonably well, probably more so in the past than I do now because it's a little bit older and I get a little bit more frustrated, but less tolerance. But I always call it the little things. So, for example, if I'm in the kitchen and I'm cooking, and it's one of those things. It's like all of a sudden you drop a spoon on the ground, and you go, "Okay, great, I'll pick that up." And then all of a sudden it gets knocked again and it drops on the ground. And you're like, oh, God. And if it happens a third time, you want to kick it across the room. I call it these little things.
And it always
little
happens the third time for you,
What's that?
And that usually happens the third time.
The third time. Exactly. It always happens the third time. So it's that stupidity. It's like, and consciously, you absolutely know, stop letting things annoy you.
Yeah.
But that's exactly that Moon Mars. The other thing with the Moon Mars is I'm also celiac, but I was that way since I was very young. But so therefore, what I've often found is Moon Mars is not just in my chart, but in other people's charts. When, when a family ends up with a stomach bug that comes through the house, or someone ends up and they have this vomiting spree or whatever, I very often, not always, but it's very often you see, oh God, okay, the moon's about to hit their Mars. It's coming around. It's literally on their Mars at the time, their natal Mars. And you can usually tell when it's going to settle. As soon as that moon passes the Mars, it's going to get better. You know, it's one of those sorts of things, but it's nearly like, oh God. So people are ringing, oh, so-and-so's sick at the moment. And I'll look at their chart and I go, yeah, look, I see what's triggering it, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
What time is it? You look at when they'll start getting better after this time, you know, but just keep your fluids up and that sort of stuff if you can. And generally speaking, it's right. It's, you know, 100% right. But because that good old, so for people who don't know astrology or watching, the moon is the stomach. Okay, so it's, you know, and the beginning of your digestion. So if you're going to vomit, it's going to come from that. It's not going to come from your intestines. So, and Mars is to do with a violent reaction to things, or, you know, overreacting, or, you know, could call it projectiles, or whatever you want to call it. So we're having a lovely conversation, but it's that sort of thing, you know, comes together. You put the energies together. Like you said, Marilyn, timing, you know, when they come through, we know they're going to react in a certain way. It's just how it's happening and manifesting at that point in time, we're not sure, you know.
Where the other tools can come in
Yeah, exactly.
and add to it, not take away, but add to it.
And
you know.
how old do you think you would say until your teacher introduced the cards and layered that
At the
on?
same time.
Okay.
So when she spoke about the sun in the tarot, she also spoke the sun in astrology.
Yeah.
So you learned them
when
concurrently.
Yeah, concurrently. And I think how she did it was brilliant, because she really did think how to reach a 9-year-old. But obviously she saw something in me.
She must have seen something.
Oh, she
in you,
picked me
Marilyn.
up.
There's no,
Yes. The story of even how I met her was surreal, you know.
Yeah.
And that story I've repeated so many times was
Please tell it again for us.
Okay, our milkman in the neighborhood died, and they were just trying to phase out milk delivery. We used to have milk delivery, and the milkman would come and drop 2 glass bottles of milk, and people would just put the money in the empty bottle. Nobody ever stole the bottles, and they would just take it back. But the milkman died, and they wanted to eliminate that service. They weren't going to fill it. So everyone had to start buying their milk in this deli. And I, being the oldest in my family, was given this due diligent job of picking up the milk before I come home from school. Okay, fine. And I guess mom had an account there, because I never had money. I'd just say, "Hi, Mr. Levine, I've got milk." "Okay, Marilyn." And away they went. And I'd just leave. And this one day I was in the deli, and this woman came up to me, an elderly lady, and she said, "Oh, child, my legs are really old, and I know you walk right by my house every day, and I will pay you 5 cents a week if you bring me home a bottle of milk." And I said, "Sure, 5 cents? That's an ice cream and a bag of candy. I got it all worked out, right?" So back then, we didn't lock doors in the city of Toronto. It was a pretty safe city. And I always walked in on the side of the house, because in the main entrance, she always told me to go to the side. And when you went to the side door, you had to go up a couple of steps, and you were in the kitchen, and the kitchen fridge was right there. And she was always behind a clothing room. And I could hear her talking, but I never interrupted her, because she asked me not to. She just put the milk in the fridge, and that's all you have to do, and then away you go. Fine. So that's what I did. But the milk in the fridge had a lot of bottles of milk in the fridge, a lot of bottles. One day I walked in, and she's pouring milk down the sink. It's all gone bad, right? And we didn't see waste back then, or I didn't. And I was mortified to see this waste. And I said, and here I'm thinking she's feeling sorry for me, and that's why she's paying me the 5 cents. Brilliant, right? So I'm saying, "You don't have to pay me. You don't have to pay me." And she says, "No, I want you to just keep bringing me the milk." So I did. And the fridge is getting full again of milk. And sure enough, another day came, like weeks or months later. I can't remember now, because I did this for quite a long time, until the turning point. And again, she's pouring milk down the sink, and I'm now crying, because I just think this is a terrible thing that she's doing for me. And I said, "Miss Sophie, you don't have to. I won't bring the milk." And no, she says, "I'll tell you what, we can stop this milk thing, providing you talk to me about the man standing beside me." And I'm a clairvoyant. I could see the other side. And I said, because I grew up having my mouth washed out with soap quite a bit, right? So a little shy and talking about dead people beside a person. And I said, and so I told her what I received or what I got. And she says, now we're ready to study. And she said, take this note, ask your mom. She said, do not ask your father, ask your mother. Well, now years later, would all fit together. This woman was far brighter than I even knew. My grandfather, have you ever heard of the RCMP? That's like the
It's the
FBI.
Mounties. You know,
It's
our red Mounties.
the Red Mounties.
Is that them? Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
the
that's
hat
the
and the red
RCMP. Yeah.
Yes.
Canada.
All
Yep.
right. It's the FBI. It's the USA's for Canadian version for the FBI.
Okay.
Anyway, my grandfather worked as a psychic for them, and I
Wow.
didn't
Okay.
know that. It was very hush hush, very secret. So, and my
I
mother,
love
I
these
mean, they
stories.
grew up with tea leaf readings and all that their kind of stuff. So none of that was strange to them. But my father was a devout Catholic. Firstborn went to the church, and I was firstborn. And I did go to the convent. I didn't get kicked out. They just called my parents to said she has a calling, just not here. And but it was a great time when I was there. I just challenged Mother Superior because I didn't understand Moses created just as many miracles as Jesus. How come he didn't get the great standing Jesus got? And I just couldn't make sense of that. And
Old logic.
How do you
so,
tame
I'm not saying any more because I don't want to get into that conversation.
how do you
well,
tame a lady like Maria? How do you catch a
anyway,
cloud and pin it down?
anyway, it was an interesting thing. But then I started really getting serious with my astrology and the tarot. And then I started graduating, and instead of reading fellow students, now I'm reading my teachers. And that is really, really a good thing, because then when you learn your teacher's secrets, they are a little bit nervous. They give you the benefit of the doubt of that answer. So
Yeah.
I did well in school, to say the least. And then I studied divinity in university, but I became quite a bohemian for quite a while. And when I finally said, this full-time job stuff, nice, but not nice enough. And I was making enough money where I didn't need a full-time job. And then I got an office, and I worked really hard. And then next thing you know, I got married, had kids, and then I worked my butt off,
Yes.
And when my husband became disabled, I really had to pull my socks up. And at that point, I was reading anywhere from 30 to 40 people a week.
That's a lot of work.
That's a lot of
That's
work.
a lot. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of mental and emotional strain.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I
you know,
meditate a
I
great
don't,
deal, but,
yeah.
and I'm blessed
And how
that the
long do your
12th house.
readings go for, Marilyn? Sorry to ask.
Back then, now I'm semi-retired, so they're longer now. Back then, it would be about 90 minutes,
Yeah. So if
thereabouts.
you look at you, I mean, I know what it's like. It's
Sometimes
very
an
hard to get
hour.
yourself. Yeah, it's very hard to get your head into a framework to do that. I mean, you weren't just working 5 days a week, were you?
I was working 5-6 days a week.
Yeah, yeah. I was going
Yeah,
to say at least
and
6.
that's not including house parties. Was different. House parties I just do tarot.
Yes,
And
I
I
tend to
do a
agree with you.
lot of house parties back then, and I did a lot of fundraisers, and then I started doing a lot of trade shows. And when you start doing trade shows, I did big trade shows, like where there would be 200 exhibitors or 300 or 400 exhibitors. And the trade shows by this one promoter, he was very slick, and he did big shows. Now, when I say big, people would complain about the door price because you had to get paid to get in the door. I can't remember what it was, $10, I think it was, to get in. And that at the time was a lot of money just to get in to the psychic show. Just to get in the doors, you had to pay
Yep.
$10. But this guy had it set up, and I became his minion because I had the busiest booth there. And we sold books, and I had astrology charts. Like back then, I had a dot matrix printer.
Yes, I
And
totally get it. Yeah,
you remember those?
yeah,
And
yeah. You pull
I
them off and
had
rip the sides off and make little books out of them.
Astroscope, and that is a precursor to SolarFire.
Yeah.
And I used that software back then. They were on those 5.25 floppy disk.
Mm-hmm.
That's really going back. So we sold astrology reports, that kind of thing. And I had people to punch out the charts for me. So all I did was next, and they'd come in and already have the chart printed out for me. Now that was when I had computers. Prior to that,
Yeah.
I had this, and I still have it. It was a wheel that you could manipulate to get the ascendant.
Hold on.
Oh, he's got it on.
I think I had one because I got a kit when I was in high
You mean like
school.
that?
That's
Oh, it's
it.
beautiful.
Except
So-
Oh,
mine,
where do you get
that's
that, Luke?
now Luke,
Well,
did
I'll
you
tell you a
make
little
that?
story. No, this. So I work. Do you know an astrologer called Chris Turner?
Yeah,
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
he was my
Chris,
teacher.
when I first started learning with Chris, that's where I started my official education, was at the Chiron School of
Okay.
Astrology. So and I was already been, and so I started teaching for her the same year that I was learning. I started first year class because I'd already sort of knew a lot, but I was sort of
Right,
filling in the
right,
gaps.
right.
And part of what she did was she wrote for TV Week. And she also wrote or did what they call dial a horoscope here in Australia. So people used to ring up and get their horoscope for the day. So I used to sit down with this little wheel and I'd put the planets out, as you can see there, and I'd just turn it and I would sit there on a dictaphone and do the dial a horoscope scripts for her.
Did you make that?
I was all of about 20.
Did you make that?
No, this was something she bought. It's
Oh,
called an astrometer. And it originally comes from Birdsboro, Pennsylvania, Green Hills Lake. So all rights reserved. You can see it written on the back there.
oh, cool.
Huh.
So this
Yeah.
was what they call an astrometer. Now you can see it's getting a bit rusty. We've had that since the 80s, probably the late 70s, early 80s, or mid 80s, I would say. And so Chris, when she was moving from her house recently, she said to me, because she's in her 80s, and so I said, look, I don't want anything from you when it does come to you decide to leave the planet and you want to go. But I said, I really think I want this. And she said, yeah, sure. So anyway, when I went over there recently to Sydney, she said, here, by the way, that's there for you to take back with you. So
Oh,
I've had it ever
nice.
since. But it's exactly the
That's
same
nice.
thing. And they're magnetic, so you can move them off and you
Oh.
So
just
you can move
put
them
on.
off.
Yeah.
All right.
Put
Now
them where
let
you
me
like.
share.
So-
My wheel wasn't quite like that. My wheel was a little different. It was latitude and latitude, and I'll have to look for it. I know it's around somewhere because I saw it after we moved and I thought, oh, good, I didn't throw it out. But it would help with the MC to get the MC.
I have
You know.
a makeshift, a very a rudimentary version that came with a kit, so you could kind of turn to get the
Yeah.
ascendant
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
So it's something like that. But ours was homemade.
Nice.
Well, my teacher made it,
So
so it was
I
homemade.
Luke is going to come back, but I was wondering if we can pin having you come back for a follow-up, because I know this was the first time I think Luke and you were able to connect, and I know he liked all your stories, like I love your stories. And there's all this wisdom and experience and advice. And I guess the last thing I kind of just wanted to ask you is what do you see as,
Sorry about that.
future patterns in this field?
What I do see is I do see a lot of people who are going to get caught up with AI. And I've listened to 2 chart interpretations by AI. And
They're
I
horrendous.
think the accuracy is there. It's technically correct, but it's flat. And it's flat because the emphasis, I think this is the human component is not there, and it shows the human component is not there. And what I mean by that, because they were showing the charts when you're listening to the conversation, and I'm seeing this chart, and there was an aspect there that I would have really put a lot of emphasis on. Intuitively, I kept looking at it, and there was a similar aspect on the other side, but And for some reason, the chart, and I guess when I actually worked it out, the one that the AI focused on weighed one more point more than the one I was looking at. And that's why it got the emphasis. But it was the one that I was looking on intuitively. I thought that one would fit. And the synopsis afterwards, which the human being gets in to say, they focused on what I was focusing on. So I thought that was very, very interesting. You know, that the
Mhm.
AI was focusing. I don't think
So
AI or any
which AI,
computer.
sorry, I
Oh,
was saying,
I
so
don't
which
know.
AI,
It was some friend who said, listen to this. It was from an AI. That's all. So,
okay. The reason I
um,
say that is because I've actually asked AI, say, for example, to calculate my chart. And I've asked it about 5 times now, and each time it gets it completely wrong.
oh,
It doesn't even calculate my chart correctly.
oh, okay.
I give it my
Well,
birth
I don't know
details
how they
and I go,
did.
can you give me my chart? And it throws it back. I've actually had versions where it's got the ascendant's completely wrong, the moon sign's completely wrong. Because remember, I told you things like my moon, if I was Greenwich Mean Time, for example,
Yeah,
then I'd have a Gemini moon. But because I'm born in Sydney, in Australia, 10 hours ahead, it's actually in Taurus. And
yeah,
I've actually had it throw back charts telling me my moon's in Gemini. So it's like getting the timing completely wrong and things like that.
right,
So
right.
yeah. Anyway, I was just
So
curious.
I think with all things, and that's the same thing what happened when astrology software first came out. If you didn't know how to do astrology by hand, you were in trouble, because I remember buying not one but two different softwares, and the ascendant was off. Are you ready by this? 8 to 12 degrees.
Yeah, it's huge.
And
Yeah.
that's huge. To me, that's way, way too off for an ascendant. That's the one point that you should have right, is the ascendant.
Yeah.
The ascendant and the MC are the 2 points that you should have right, because that's how you compile a chart by hand.
Yeah.
So as the years went on, you started seeing software companies correcting themselves and getting better at it. We're not seeing new software companies coming up. SolarFire still seems to have a strong hold on things. And
We're seeing
as much
apps
as,
though.
yeah,
Apps.
as an app,
Yeah, we're seeing more apps
Yeah.
for
But I find a lot of the astrology programs, the minor ones I'm seeing, aren't as robust and they're not quite as accurate. That's what
well,
I'm missing bits
you
and
know,
pieces.
apps are
I shouldn't be saying
shortcuts
that, but
to
they are.
things, aren't they?
Mhm.
Aren't
They're
apps a
different.
shortcut?
I think that
I
might
just
be a
think
whole other topic.
okay, all right.
Yeah.
Well,
That's a
for
whole other
me,
topic.
yeah, for me though, I've seen a lot of transitions and transformations with software, and there is other software that I like better, but my database is so big and none of them have search engines. And SolarFire at least has a search engine. When I want to find a file, I can type somebody's name in or their birth date in, and I can get that
Bring it up.
file, you know.
Now, ladies, I'm probably going to have to leave this. So
Yes,
just me.
we
You guys
were
can continue on
Okay.
for a bit
we
longer
were
if you like.
we were wrapping up,
Yeah,
and when you stepped away, I said that I'd love to have Marilyn back and do another follow-up.
absolutely.
Yeah,
I'd love to
yeah.
get into your brain a little bit more. And I think I need a chair like you've got too, Marilyn. So you're always
Yeah.
racing somewhere, is that right?
Yeah.
So, so Marilyn,
Yeah.
were you saying
Yeah.
that you think that there is still a viable place for practitioners?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah, because I don't
absolutely.
think AI is going to cut it.
No, no way in the
I
world.
think there are some things that no matter what we do, no matter how fancy we get with technology, we still need the human component. And
Yeah.
astrology is
Beautiful.
one of them.
People will take shortcuts. I'll give you another example of that, Jen. AI does some amazing imagery and pictures, but you're still not going to beat the capacity to actually, create something by hand. You'll know the difference. One AI can only get printed. You can never have something artistically made by an
Mhm.
AI. An AI is not going to make, not at least in the current stages anyway, it might use a digital printer to print something down the track, but it's not going to create some lovely piece of art made out of, iron,
Oil, acrylic.
yeah, or
No.
acrylics or
Yeah,
whatever the case
yeah.
may be. So there's always going to be a human element that's involved. And I think what AI does miss is intuition. It doesn't have that psychic ability to actually tune in. What Marilyn was saying before, as a child, we have very similar, although we probably have different rising signs. Sounds like yours might be Libra, mine being Sagittarius.
Yeah, I've got
And
Libra rising.
yeah, so the thing is, but as a child, I was the same. I thought it was normal that you saw people walking around. You know, I didn't know otherwise, and I didn't really talk about it. But I always had that capacity to see spirit. I don't see them as often anymore. I don't tune into them as often anymore. And that's probably because I've programmed my head and grown up and gone off in different ways and become more rational and practical in a lot of
Where
ways.
I
Because I
was
am a Capricorn.
reinforced
Yeah.
at the age of 9, I got more reinforcement of what I was doing.
Yes.
And
No, I got the
so,
opposite.
right. So the transition was
Yeah.
a very simple one for me.
Yeah.
It was, no, being self-employed as an astrologer is tough. It really is tough. You have to network continuously. I think now with technology, it helps to some degree, but people's expectations are surreal at times.
So Marilyn, one of the things I'm
I
going to
think.
ask when we launch the Astro College community, we'll have a community area where people can come in. I'd love to do something like invite you to come in and do a live session. You know how you talked about doing room scenarios, and we may even see if we can sort of put it out to people and sort of say, hey, come along. We're going to have a radio show on there on Zoom as well. There'll be a few things that we set up down the track. I'd love to have you come back to do that sort of, because that's what people are missing. People want human interaction. They want to hear from someone who knows. And it's great to go. I've just had someone enroll in the courses here at IAA who has done a lot of self-teaching courses online, really good ones, got a great astrology knowledge, but she's put her hand up and gone, I'm still not, I don't feel that I've got what I need because I haven't had that class environment where I've got interaction. I can communicate,
human
and ask
interaction.
questions. Yes.
Live.
So these things are really going to continue to be important. That's my point here. I'm just going to sort of say bye to you guys because I literally have to jump in the car very soon to take off. I've got about 10,
Whose
15
car
minutes.
are you going to drive?
Partner's car. My lovely.
Lucky you.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going in hers.
Thank you, Marilyn, for your time and being our guest. And I really enjoyed this and looking forward to if and when you're available to connect with us again, Marilyn.
I would love that and get to know you even more. So thanks so much,
Luke. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Much appreciated. Thanks, Marilyn.
All right.
I'm going to head off. I'm going to literally leave it now. So I'll catch you guys later.
Yes.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
All right.
See you later.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Guy.
Yeah. You have a lot of similarities and